She learned to count his footsteps, not because she was waiting for him, not anymore. She had stopped waiting somewhere around the 14-month mark, right around the time she realized that the sound of his boots on marble meant he was walking past her door, not to it. She just learned the pattern because silence has texture in a palace, and his silence had a very specific rhythm. 12 steps from the east staircase. Pause at the war room. 8 more to his study. Door shut. Seraphine would turn back to her book. That was 4 years ago. She had read a lot of books since then. The Black Moon Palace sat at the top of the Veyrath Ridge like it had grown there. Stone dark as wet coal. Towers that caught clouds on clear days. Walls thick enough that you could forget there was weather on the other side. It was the kind of place that swallowed people whole and called it grandeur. 6 packs answered to the king who lived here. 3 mountain ranges fell inside his borders. 2 rivers started in his land and finished in someone else's. His name was Kale, Alpha King, unmovable, the kind of man the old pack stories were built around, not because anything good happened to men like that, but because everything pivotal did. Wars, truces, the kind of decisions that left a shape in history you could still feel a century later. He had taken Seraphine as his Luna 4 years ago because the mating bond said so, because the fates had written something in her blood and his bones, and the two of them had been in the same room during a full moon, and the rest, as they say, was instinct and inevitability. He had performed the ceremony. He had given her the east wing. 4 rooms, 2 balconies, a view of the ridge that would have been beautiful if she'd felt like looking at it. Then he had gone back to ruling. She had gone back to, well, she'd had to figure out what she was going back to, since she hadn't really started anything yet. Here is what 4 years of being invisible to your own husband teaches you. You learn to fill space differently. Seraphine had come from a small border pack, nothing notable. Her mother was a healer. Her father managed trade routes for the eastern settlements. She had grown up practical, warm, a little stubborn, the kind of girl who finished other people's sentences not because she was impatient, but because she was paying attention, and most people liked being seen. In Black Moon Palace, she became very useful. Within the first year, she knew every healer by name and had reorganized the pack's herb stores so that nothing ran out during the winter runs. By the second year, the warriors' families came to her when they had problems that didn't fit neatly into official pack channels. A dispute over territory lines, a young Omega struggling after a bad pregnancy, a family that had fallen behind on their food allocation because the husband had a broken leg and the wife was too proud to ask for help. She never announced that she was doing any of this. She just did it. The old healer, Marin, watched her for about 6 months before saying anything. Then one morning, she looked up from the medicine table and said, "You know you're the real spine of this place." Seraphine had smiled, not disagreeing, and gone back to grinding the dried root she was working on. She had a table where she ate her meals. It seated 20. Most nights, she sat at one end with a book propped against the candle stand and ate whatever the kitchen had made, and the kitchen had learned, because the kitchen noticed her, even if the king did not, that she liked her meals warm and simple, and that she always left a small portion untouched, not because she didn't want it, but because there was always a young pup lingering near the servant's entrance who would have it otherwise. She was not martyring herself. That is important to say. She had simply surveyed the land available to her and decided what to grow in it. She had a life. It was hers. Quiet, real, built from the ground up, without any help. Kale did not see it. He nodded at her the way he nodded at the furniture. Functional, present, polite in the distant way of someone who respects property. When their paths crossed, which happened, you cannot avoid someone entirely in the same building. Physics prevents it. He would say something about the pack, about a decision he'd made that affected her East Wing schedule, about something administrative and bloodless. She would respond in kind. She had stopped flinching at the nod somewhere around year 2. By year 4, she had stopped noticing it at all. The delegation arrived on a gray Tuesday morning with 12 horses, 4 wagons, and more luggage than any peace mission technically needed. They were from the Ashvale territory, a Western coalition pack, small in power, the way a well-placed knife is small, significant in trade, the way good knives always are. Black Moon had been in a territorial disagreement with them over a river crossing for almost 2 years. Not a war, a grievance, the kind that costs you money and sleep and the occasional border patrol officer. The King's Council had decided a delegation was the right approach. Kale had agreed and then immediately handed the logistics to his advisor Ren, which was how things were done around here. He decided, someone else arranged. Seraphine noticed the arrangements falling apart and quietly fixed them before anyone was embarrassed. She had organized the guest quarters herself. She had briefed the kitchen on Ashvale dietary restrictions. She had made sure the Eastern Hall was presentable for the receiving ceremony and that the flowers on the entrance table were the Ashvale Coalition's ceremonial color, dark gold, for good faith, because she had read about it in a territorial customs document and it seemed like the kind of thing that mattered. None of this was her official job. All of this was necessary. She was in the receiving hall when they arrived, standing 3 steps to the side of the formal greeting line, because that was where Luna stood, present, acknowledged, peripheral, and she was watching the delegation file in, with the mild professional interest of someone cataloging a situation they will later need to manage. Most of the delegation was what she expected: pack officials, trade representatives, 2 men who had the careful look of people whose job was to say the right thing in the right order, and never, under any circumstances, say the wrong thing. And then 1 man who looked like he'd never learned that rule, and didn't especially need to. He was not alpha. She could tell immediately, not from his bearing, which was easy enough, but from the way he moved through the hall, which was curious rather than dominant. He looked at the architecture. He looked at the pack members lining the walls. He looked at the dark gold flowers on the entrance table, and something in his face shifted, not quite a smile, more like a recognition, and he glanced around to see who had thought of that. His eyes found her. She looked away. She heard him say something quiet to a servant, saw the servant lean in to respond, and did not let herself look back to see what he did with the answer. Then the formal greeting started, and Kale was doing the thing he did in official settings, the controlled charisma, the measured handshake, the absolute authority that filled rooms without effort, and Seraphine was standing 3 steps to the side, as always, and the man from the delegation was standing across the hall. He looked at Kale. Then he looked at the 3-step gap between Kale and Seraphine. Then he looked back at Kale. Then he said, very quietly, so quietly she almost didn't catch it, "Ah." 1 word. It carried 4 years in it somehow. She didn't know how. His name was Dorian Voss. She learned this at the formal dinner, sitting between 2 territorial trade officials who wanted to talk about the river crossing dispute in enough detail to qualify as a form of mild torture. Dorian was seated across and down the table, not near her, not arranged near her, just existing in the same long dining room, and she was not watching him. She was listening to the trade official on her left explain the exact cubic meter capacity of the contested river crossing, and she was nodding and thinking about the herb inventory she needed to check in the morning. He caught her eye once, briefly. She looked back at the trade official and asked a clarifying question about the river capacity that genuinely impressed the man, because it was a good question, because she had been paying attention despite everything. After dinner, in the hall, Marin appeared at her elbow and said, "The envoy asked about you." "About the delegation arrangements?" Seraphine said. "About you." Seraphine considered this for a moment. "The dark gold flowers," she said. "Probably." She went to bed and did not think about it. She thought about it a little. She found him in the pack library the next morning. Or rather, she went to the library because she went to the library every morning. It was her library in every way except the legal one, and he was already there when she arrived, which meant either he had asked where she went in the mornings, possible, or he was also a person who went to libraries, which was more reassuring. He was reading something in Old Veyrath dialect, which was a dead language of the mountain packs, and he looked up when she came in and said, "You reorganized this collection." Not a question. The previous system was alphabetical by the first author's name, she said, which meant nothing if you didn't already know what you were looking for. And the new system? Subject, then region of origin, then date. He thought about this. That's a system for someone who's trying to learn something they don't already know. Yes, she said, and went to the shelf she needed. She pulled the book she'd come for, a text on Vairath medicinal traditions, 3rd edition, somewhat battered, and settled into the chair by the window, which was her chair, and opened it. He went back to his book. For a while there was just the library doing what libraries do, which is hold people inside a particular quality of quiet. Then he said, "That edition has an error in the chapter on northern root compounds." She looked up. "Page 147, he said. "It says the fermentation period is 5 days. The correct figure is 9. The first 2 printings had it right. The 3rd edition's editor was in a hurry." She looked at page 147. "Read the fermentation figure." Looked at him. "How do you know that?" "I made that mistake once." He did not elaborate. He turned a page. She sat with the non-elaboration for a moment, the way it was dropped and left, the blood money of it, the loaded 2 words, and then she said, "What were you trying to compound?" "Something I shouldn't have been compounding." "Did it work anyway?" "Spectacularly not." He said it with such flat delivery that she laughed before she could decide not to. Real laughter, the kind that startled her on the way out, like a bird she'd forgotten was living in her chest. She looked back at her book. He looked back at his. She made a note in the margin about the fermentation period. They argued the next morning about the text she was reading, because he had opinions about it. Not academic opinions, the annoying kind where someone wants to demonstrate their knowledge, but actual disagreements, the kind that required her to push back and defend her reading and reconsider one point and hold firm on another. She held firm on the other. He told her she was wrong. She told him she wasn't. He pulled a different text from the shelf, the right shelf, she noticed, which meant he'd paid attention to her reorganization system, and found the passage he wanted, and brought it to her, and pointed at it, and she read it, and she said, "That actually supports my position." He read it again. "Marginally," he said, "substantially. We can agree to substantially. We can agree to substantially." This was the 2nd morning. By the 4th, Marin was bringing them both tea without being asked, which meant Marin had decided this was a regular arrangement and was operating accordingly, which was fine. It was conversation. She hadn't had real conversation in a long time, not the kind with push and pull, the kind that required her actual brain. She had not realized how hungry she was for her actual brain to be required. The pack noticed within the week. Packs always notice. This is their nature. They are built on attention, on social radar, on the collective tracking of every meaningful movement within the group. They had been noticing Seraphine for years, quietly, without making a production of it. They had noticed that the king didn't look at her. They had noticed that she had built something real in the absence of his looking. Now they noticed a man from the delegation who looked at her constantly, not the leering kind of looking, not performing it. The way you look at something that interests you genuinely, with real attention, with the willingness to be surprised by what you find. The pack talked in the kitchen, in the training yard, in the low voices of people who aren't gossiping, they're just stating facts to each other. None of them said anything to Kale. There was a reason for that. You can't tell a man to look at something he has decided not to see. Everyone in Black Moon Palace had learned this. It was not a cruel decision. Kale was not a cruel man. It was more like a blind spot, the specific geometry of a person so fixed on certain things that the things directly beside them became invisible. He was always at war, or in council, or on the border, or thinking about any of those things in the spaces between them. The space beside him had been empty for so long that he had stopped registering it as a space. Dorian did not flirt. This is important because Seraphine had prepared herself, in the abstract way of someone who expects a thing might happen, for the possibility of flirtation. She knew how to handle flirtation. She had a tone for it, pleasant, final, redirecting, that had served her adequately with the occasional pack official who forgot she was the Luna Queen and not simply a woman in a room. Dorian did not flirt. He talked. He argued. He asked questions and waited for the actual answers. He disagreed without performing the disagreement. He told her once, plainly, that the dark gold flowers at the entrance had been the most politically astute move of the entire delegation visit, and that it had come from her, and not from any official diplomatic brief, and he said this like it was simply a fact he was acknowledging. She said it had seemed like the right thing to do. He said most right things go undone, because the people who notice them don't have authority, and the people with authority don't notice them. She looked at him. He looked at his tea. The library held its particular quality of quiet. She changed the subject. He fell in love with her, the way a precise man does everything. Carefully, with full knowledge of the cost, not letting himself pretend it was something smaller or more manageable than it was. The bond between her and the king was a real thing. He was not a man who dismissed real things, and she had not given him any signal, and he was not in the business of making himself a problem in other people's lives. He fell in love with her anyway, because he was a person, not a system, and persons do not always have the luxury of choosing what they fall into. He said nothing about it. He kept going to the library. She kept being there. The pack kept watching. It was a Tuesday again when Cale smelled it. He crossed the upper corridor, the one that ran above the east courtyard, the one he used as a shortcut to the war room because it was faster than the main hall, and Seraphine's scent hit him. Familiar. It was always familiar. 4 years of the same building, you learn people's scents the way you learn the smell of rooms, background and constant and unregistered. But this time there was something threaded through it, something that wasn't him. He stopped walking. Not a dramatic stop, not like his legs failed him. More like the signal from his brain to his legs just didn't arrive for a moment. He stood in the upper corridor, and the scent sat in the air around him, and something in the back of his skull went very, very still. He identified the instinct immediately and dismissed it in the same motion, because he was not the kind of man who let instinct run without interrogation. It was territorial. It was biological. The wolf in him, the alpha in him, registering a presence it had not authorized. Completely understandable. No different from the mechanism that had made his grandfather draw blood over a border crossing. Chemistry, evolution, not emotion. He told himself this. He told himself this again. He was still standing in the corridor 4 minutes later. He went to find her. She was in the eastern courtyard. Below him, through the corridor's narrow windows, seated at the stone table, the one she'd had positioned under the old Veyrath pine 3 years ago, when she'd decided the courtyard needed more usable space, and across from her was the Ashvale envoy, and they were mid-argument about something. He could not hear the words. He caught only the shape of the conversation. Its ease, the way she leaned forward when she was making a point, both forearms on the table, chin slightly lifted, the look on her face of someone who is not performing engagement but actually in it. He had never seen her lean forward. He stood at the narrow window and watched her lean forward and felt something move in his chest that he did not have a name for, or would not reach for one, and then felt something else behind that, sharper, uglier, the shape of a question he didn't want to answer about why he was surprised that her face could look like that. He watched for longer than was reasonable. He knew it wasn't reasonable. He kept watching anyway. He did not go down to the courtyard. He went to the war room. He stood over the maps for 2 hours and did not look at them once. He said nothing to her that night. He said nothing the next night either. He was not ready yet for what he would have to say if he started saying things. He began appearing. This was the word for it, appearing, because presence implies intention, and he was not ready to acknowledge intention. He simply began to occupy spaces he had not previously occupied. The library, in the late morning. The main hall during meals that he had previously taken in his study. The pack gatherings he had been delegating to Wren for the better part of 2 years. He was there. Seraphine noticed within the first day. She was not stupid. She had never been stupid. 4 years of watching a man very carefully from 3 steps to the side, because when you are not being watched, you learn to do the watching, had given her an extremely accurate read of his patterns. She knew exactly what his daily architecture looked like. She knew the deviation. She noticed. She served the pack. She spoke with Dorian. She tended a young female who had come in with a badly set bone that needed re-breaking and resetting, which she did with the steady hands of someone who had been doing practical medicine for years. She sat at the long table and ate her meal with her book propped against the candle. On the third day, Cale sat down at the same table. Not beside her, not performing closeness. Somewhere in the middle of the table's impossible length, which put him roughly 8 feet away, which was fine, was whatever, was a geometric fact. She passed him the bread, not looking up from her book, reached for the bread basket, registered that it was closer to him than to her, picked it up, set it near his plate. That was it. He stared at the bread basket for a moment. She turned a page. He did not know why it was the hardest thing she had done to him in 4 years. She didn't know either, probably. But something about the complete absence of ceremony in it, the way she had passed it as easily as she might pass it to one of the pack younglings, no significance, no performance, no reaching for something, opened up a very specific and unpleasant view into what 4 years of absence actually looked like from the other side. He had been furniture to her, functional, present, uninteresting, the same way she had been to him. He ate the bread. He could not taste it. He watched her differently now, not the way he should have been watching her for 4 years, though that sat in him too, heavy and without resolution, but with the specific attention of a man who is trying to understand something he has been looking at wrong. He watched her with a young warrior who had lost her mother in a border skirmish 6 weeks ago. Seraphine said the mother's name, just said it, out loud, like she was still a real person and not a grief, and the warrior's eyes went glassy and grateful in a way that meant, you remembered. You kept her real. He watched her organize a supply distribution for the pack's lower settlements without any official authority to do so, moving through the administration office like someone who had been quietly running the logistics for years because if she didn't, they wouldn't get done. They wouldn't have gotten done. He knew that. He had always known that in the abstract way of someone who trusts their household runs itself. He had never looked at who was running it. He began to understand the architecture of what she had built in the space he had left empty. It was not small. It was large, structural. The kind of thing that, if you removed it, the walls would notice before the king did. He tried to talk to her. He was catastrophically bad at it. He said things about pack logistics, about a treaty amendment that would affect the East Wing schedule, about a new allocation system for the southern settlements that her supply network might, that she should probably know about because it intersected with what she was. She listened. She responded. She was polite, measured. She gave him exactly as much as the conversation required, and not a molecule more. When he ran out of logistics to discuss, there was silence. He stood in it. She waited with the patience of someone who has spent 4 years making peace with silences far larger than this one. The delegation, he said finally. How is it going, in your view? She looked at him, not the polite look. Something that had more architecture to it, more history, the kind of gaze you give someone when you're deciding how honest to be. The treaty terms are sound, she said. The river crossing issue has a real solution. I think you'll find it in the Eastern Tributary Clause if you look at it from the Ashevale side's water use patterns instead of from the ownership question. It was good advice. It was correct. It was also entirely not what he had been asking. He had been asking something he didn't know how to phrase yet. Right, he said. She went back to whatever she was doing. He stood there 1 more second than he should have, then left. He went back to his study and sat with the specific discomfort of a man who has been very good at many things for a very long time and has just discovered that the things he has been bad at have been quietly becoming the most important ones. Dorian found him in the war room on the 5th night of the 2nd week. Cale was alone, standing at the long table with the territory maps laid out in front of him. Not because he was working, he had stopped actually seeing the maps days ago, but because it was a reasonable place to be standing when you needed to be somewhere and didn't know where to go. Dorian walked in, looked at the maps, looked at Cale, and did not pretend anything. That was the first thing. I didn't expect a summons, Dorian said, but here I am. I didn't issue one, Cale said. No, Dorian said, but the energy of a man standing in a war room he's not actually using tends to circulate through a building eventually. Cale said nothing. Dorian pulled out a chair and sat down in it, which was either extremely brave or completely indifferent to personal safety, and looked at the maps the way you look at things when you're not talking about them. "I'm not here to cause a problem," he said. "I know." "She hasn't," he started, then chose different words. "Nothing has happened that should concern you on grounds of—" "I know," Cale said. Dorian looked at him, looked at the maps, said nothing for a while. Then, "She built a life in the wreckage of the one you didn't show up for." No anger, no accusation, dressed up as a statement. The particular sadness of a man reporting a fact he has personally verified and wishes were otherwise. The words sat in the room. Cale did not answer, because he did not have an answer. Not a good one. Not one that would survive being said out loud to someone who had looked at Seraphine with actual attention and seen what was there. "She's—" Dorian stopped, tried again. "She's someone who deserved to be seen." Past tense, not accusatory, just past tense. "I know," Cale said, for the third time, and this time it meant something entirely different than the first two. Dorian stood, straightened his jacket, looked at the maps one more time with what appeared to be genuine geographic interest. "The Eastern Tributary Clause," he said. "She's right about it. She's usually right. That's a fact about her that would have been useful to know 4 years ago." He walked out. Cale stood at the empty war room table for a long time afterward, and the maps were there, and the territory lines were drawn in careful ink, and none of it told him what he was supposed to do with the shape of what he had spent 4 years not seeing. The delegation's final evening was a formal thing. Dinner, a ceremony. The signing of the treaty amendment, the one with the Eastern Tributary Clause, which Seraphine had been right about, which Wren had confirmed after 2 days of analysis, which Cale had signed off on with a feeling in his chest that was somewhere between impressed and wrecked, and the formal close of the delegation visit. The great hall had been prepared. Dark gold flowers again, because of course they had been, because Seraphine had the details of this palace organized in her head the way a general organizes a campaign. The long tables were set for 60. The kitchen had done something extraordinary with the autumn harvest that was making the entire hall smell like a place that cared about things. She was standing in the corridor outside the great hall when he found her, alone for a moment, adjusting the clasp on her bracelet, one of those small, real, completely unceremonial gestures that people make when they think no one is watching. He said her name. She went still, not like she was frightened. More like a person who has not heard their name said in that particular register in a very long time and is calibrating what register it was. She turned. He had things he wanted to say. He had been composing them in the war room and in the corridor and in the 3 minutes between his study and here. They were good things, important things, things about the East Tributary Clause, and about the pack, and about what he had been watching and not watching, and what it meant that he had not been watching. What came out was, "You've been, the things you do here. For the pack. I didn't," he stopped, started again. "I should have been paying more attention," he said. To a lot of things. It was the truest version of what he meant. It was also the smallest, most inadequate form it could take. She looked at him. The real look. The one that had 4 years behind it. Not 1 year or 2 years or the manageable grief of a short disappointment, but 4 full years of a woman learning to build something real in the absence of being seen, and doing it, and not requiring his acknowledgement to do it. She held the look the way you hold something that has weight. He held it back. He did not look away. For the first time he could not calculate how long. He did not let his gaze do the thing it had been doing, which was slide past her the way light slides past a window it doesn't need to enter. He stayed. "I know," she said. 2 words. They had enough inside them to fill the war room, the upper corridor, every morning of every year, both sides of the library argument, the bread he could not taste, the lean forward he had never given her reason for, Dorian's past tense, the dark gold flowers that had been exactly right. She adjusted her bracelet. The clasp settled. She walked into the great hall. He followed. The dinner was what dinners are. Food and conversation, and the performance of goodwill that sometimes becomes actual goodwill if the people involved are trying hard enough. The treaty was acknowledged, speeches were made. The The kind of small, graceful gestures that packed diplomacy runs on were exchanged in the correct order. Dorian sat near the end of the table. He raised his glass once, briefly, in Seraphine's direction. Not romantically. The way you raise a glass to someone you respect. She inclined her head. He left at dawn. She did not watch him go. She was already in the courtyard with Marin, and two of the pack younglings who had managed to get into the herb garden and were now trying to explain themselves, which was taking some time. Kale ate breakfast in the main hall, alone at the long table, because Seraphine was in the courtyard, and he was not yet the kind of man who walks into a courtyard with purpose, though he was trying to become one. He had been trying for 2 weeks. It was slow work. The work of a man who has been very good at absence and must now learn, from the beginning, what presence actually requires. Not proximity. He understood now. He had understood it in the upper corridor, watching her lean forward, that proximity and presence are not the same architecture. You can be in the same building for 4 years and be nowhere. He had been nowhere. He was trying to learn the coordinates of somewhere. She did not make it easy. She was not punishing him. That is not who Seraphine was. She did not build walls or close doors or perform her grief for an audience. She simply continued to be exactly who she had become, the woman who held the spine of the place, who remembered dead mothers' names, who argued about fermentation periods and got them right, who passed bread without ceremony, and she left room, or did not leave room. She could not quite decide yet. There was a question sitting between them that neither of them had named. It was not the question of whether he had failed her, because they both knew the answer to that one. It was the question of what you do when someone builds a whole life in the space where your love was supposed to be. When they built it so well, so real, so entirely without needing you, that you cannot simply walk in and claim it now. It doesn't belong to you. You didn't build it. You only just started looking at it. What do you do with that? He had no answer. She was not going to give him one. That was correct. That was the right shape of it. You do not hand someone the answer to the thing they owe you. They have to find it. They have to do the work of finding it themselves, in the same way she had done the work of building her life herself. He was going to have to learn to show up. Not for her forgiveness. Not for the version of her that had been waiting. That version had gone somewhere around the 14-month mark, next to the weeping she had put away, and it was not coming back. For the version of her that existed now, the real one, the one who argued about books, and knew the Eastern Tributary Clause, and passed bread without looking up. If she let him, that was the open question. The rupture, sitting between them, unnamed and unresolved, the way ruptures live, not as wounds, exactly, but as doors. Either side could open one. Neither was required to. She was back in the library the following Monday morning. Same chair, same window. The Veyrath medicinal text, the one with the fermentation error she had corrected in the margin, open on her lap. She heard footsteps in the corridor. 12 of them. The familiar rhythm. They stopped outside the library door. For a long moment, nothing. Then the door opened. He came in. He looked at the reorganized shelves. Subject, then region, then date. The system built for someone who is trying to learn something they don't already know. He ran one hand along the spines of the books on the nearest shelf, slowly, not reading the titles. He went to the shelf he needed, pulled a text, brought it to the chair across from hers, the chair that had been across from hers for 2 weeks of mornings, and sat down, opened the book, did not say anything. She looked at him for a moment. His eyes were on the page, but his jaw was doing something that it did when he was working hard at a difficult thing. She looked back at her own book. The library held its particular quality of quiet. After a while, she said, "There's an error in the chapter you're looking at." He went still. "Page 63, she said. "The northern compound ratios are off by 1/3. The second edition has the correct figures." A pause. "I'll get the second edition," he said. He got up, went to the shelf, found it, the right shelf, because she had built the system and he had finally learned it, and brought it back, sat down, found page 63. "Read it." "You're right," he said. "I usually am," she said. She said it with no venom and no warmth and no performance. Flat. True. He looked up at her. She was already reading. He went back to his page. The library was quiet. Outside, the Veyrath Ridge caught the morning light the way it always did. Stone and sky, and the particular gray of autumn coming in, and the pack moving through its day below, and the long table in the hall with its empty seats, and the courtyard with the Veyrath pine above the stone table where someone had once leaned forward with both forearms flat and her chin lifted and her face doing something real. It was a beginning, not a resolved one, not a clean one, just a man learning to arrive and a woman who had stopped waiting but had not, quite, stopped. The door between them was open. The question was still open too. That was enough, for a Monday morning in a library that had been reorganized for someone trying to learn something they didn't already know. That was, for now, exactly enough.